Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world that history has largely forgotten. A world of mud and blood, of sealed letters and broken bones, of men who rode through darkness with secrets that could topple kingdoms. Tonight, we're exploring the brutal, terrifying, and utterly miserable life of a medieval courier. And fair warning, you probably wouldn't survive a single day of it. You might be picturing something romantic. A gallant rider on a white horse, galloping across sunlit hills with an important message tucked into a leather satchel. Maybe he stops at a charming inn, enjoys a warm meal, flirts with the innkeeper's daughter, and arrives at his destination to receive a hero's welcome. Perhaps he's greeted with fanfare, handed a pouch of gold coins, and sent on his way with a full belly and warm regards. The grateful lord pats him on the back, commends his bravery, and sends him home with stories of adventure. That's a lovely image. It's also complete fantasy. The reality was darker, much darker. Medieval couriers faced dangers that would make modern nightmares seem tame. They rode through unmapped wilderness where bandits waited behind every tree, their crossbows loaded and their morals abandoned long ago. They crossed rivers swollen with rain, their horses struggling against currents that could drag both animal and rider to a watery grave. They navigated roads that turned into rivers of mud so deep horses drowned in them, their desperate whinnies fading as they sank beneath the surface. And perhaps worst of all, they delivered messages to lords who sometimes killed the messenger, just because they didn't like what they heard. A single piece of parchment sealed with wax and carried through hell could end with a sword through the belly of the man who brought it. These were men who kissed their families goodbye knowing they might never return. They watched the faces of their wives and children grow smaller through the castle gates, memorizing those features in case this was the last time they'd ever see them. They carried with them the weight of farewells that might be permanent, the hollow feeling of unfinished business that could never be completed if luck turned against them. Many of them were right to wonder if they'd return. Many of them didn't. So before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your city and the current time in the comments. I love seeing who's up late with me from around the world, lying in the darkness, letting history carry them towards sleep. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Because tonight, you're not just learning about medieval couriers, you're becoming one. It begins with a summons you never expected. You're a young man in medieval England, perhaps in the year 1325, maybe 20 years old, though you've never been entirely certain of your exact age. Your mother told you once that you were born during the great storm that knocked down the old church tower, but she died when you were young and you never thought to ask her more specific details. You work as a servant in a noble household, one of dozens of men and women who keep the great estate running. Your days are filled with endless labour, scrubbing floors that noble boots will dirty again within hours, mucking out stables that will fill with horse dung again by nightfall, carrying wood and water and whatever else needs carrying from one place to another. But you have something that sets you apart from most of the other servants. You can read. This makes you unusual among the common people. Perhaps only 1 in 10 people in all of England can make sense of written words in this era. The skill came to you almost by accident. A monk travelling through your village when you were a boy took an interest in you for reasons you never understood. Perhaps he saw something in your eyes, some spark of curiosity that made him want to kindle it. He taught you your letters during the 2 months he stayed, scratching them in the dirt at first and then on precious scraps of parchment. You can write a little too, which makes you even more valuable. Your handwriting is crude compared to a trained scribe's, but you can form letters that others can read, and in a world where written communication is power, that's no small thing. And you can ride a horse without falling off. This last skill came from necessity more than training. The stable master let you exercise the horses when the regular grooms were sick or drunk or both, and you discovered you had a natural seat. The horses respond to you, sensing your calm even when your heart races. These 3 skills, reading and writing and riding, are about to change your entire life. One morning the steward calls you into his chambers. The summons comes through one of the senior servants, a terse command delivered without explanation. The steward wants to see you. Now. In his private chambers. You've never been invited there before. You've barely spoken to the steward in all the years you've worked here. The room smells of candle wax and old parchment, accumulated over years of administrative work that keeps a great household running. Dust motes dance in the thin light coming through the narrow window. The steward sits behind a heavy oak desk covered with documents, his face half-shadowed as he looks up at your arrival. He's a severe man with a permanent frown carved into his face, the kind of expression that comes from decades of dealing with incompetent servants and demanding lords. His eyes are cold and calculating, assessing everything they see. When he looks at you, it's with the measuring gaze of someone evaluating livestock at market, determining worth and usefulness and expendability. He tells you the Lord needs messengers, men who can travel fast across dangerous territory without getting killed, men who can keep their mouths shut about what they carry and what they see, men who can deliver letters without being tempted to read them, even when they have the ability to do so. Men who are literate enough to be trusted with important documents, but lowborn enough to be expendable if something goes wrong. That last word hangs in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Expendable. The steward doesn't soften it or explain it away. He doesn't dress it up with reassurances or qualifications. He lets it sit there between you, lets you understand exactly what kind of position you're being offered. You are being asked to risk your life. You are being told in the politest possible terms that your life doesn't matter very much to the people who will be sending you into danger. But the pay is good, better than anything you've earned scrubbing floors and mucking out stables. 3 times what you make now, maybe more if you prove yourself capable. Enough to save a little, perhaps enough to eventually buy your way into something better. And there's something else in his voice, something that sounds almost like respect. Messengers, he says, are trusted. They carry the Lord's words across the realm, his secrets, his power. They travel where knights cannot go quietly, where armies would attract too much attention. They slip between enemy lines and through hostile territories, carrying information that can change the outcome of wars. A messenger who serves well can rise far. He can gain the attention of powerful men. He can learn secrets that others would kill to know. He can make connections that will serve him for a lifetime, or he can die in a ditch somewhere, robbed and murdered and forgotten, his body left for the crows and the wolves. You don't fully understand what you're agreeing to, but you say yes anyway. What else can you do? This is the opportunity of your life. You'd be a fool to turn it down. And so, you begin to learn what it truly means to carry messages in the medieval world. The process of becoming a royal messenger, or nuncius regis as they were called in the Latin of official documents, was more formal than you might expect. These weren't random men grabbed off the street and handed a letter with a vague suggestion that they should probably deliver it somewhere. They were carefully selected from 3 main sources, each representing a different path into this dangerous profession. The first and most prestigious path was to transfer from another noble household or religious establishment where you had already proven your capability and integrity. A messenger who had served a bishop for 10 years had already demonstrated everything that mattered. He knew how to navigate unfamiliar territories using only landmarks and the position of the sun. He knew how to handle delicate situations, delivering bad news to powerful men without getting his throat cut. He knew how to keep his mouth shut about the secrets he carried, even when those secrets burned in his chest with the desire to be shared. Such men were prized. They commanded respect and relatively good wages. They were trusted with the most sensitive missions, the ones where failure could mean war or disgrace. The second path was internal promotion. Servants already working in the royal household who had demonstrated exceptional trustworthiness might be elevated to the position of messenger. These promotions never came quickly. A man might serve for years, watched constantly without knowing he was being watched, tested repeatedly without knowing he was being tested. Perhaps he returned lost valuables without stealing them. Perhaps he overheard sensitive conversations and never breathed a word of what he learned. Perhaps he was offered bribes and refused them, or given opportunities to betray his master's trust and chose loyalty instead. The household was always watching. The household was always testing. And the men who passed those tests over and over again eventually earned the chance to prove themselves on the road. The third path was to work your way up from courier, the lesser messenger who ran shorter routes and handled less sensitive documents. These couriers were the workhorses of medieval communication, carrying routine correspondence between nearby estates, delivering invitations and bills and mundane administrative documents that no one would bother to intercept. The work was hard and the pay was poor, but it provided something invaluable, experience. A man who had spent years as a courier knew the roads, he knew the dangers, he knew how to survive. And if he proved himself reliable over months or years of faithful service, he might earn the privilege of carrying something that actually mattered. In your case, you fall somewhere between these categories. You've served the household well enough to be noticed. Someone apparently vouched for your character, put their own reputation on the line to recommend you. That someone, you later learn, was the head groom, an old man with a face like weathered leather and hands that have handled 10,000 horses. He saw you return a gold coin you found in the stables rather than pocketing it. He saw you work late without complaint when others had gone to their beds. He saw you treat the horses with kindness even when no one was watching. Such small tests of integrity were constantly administered without your knowledge. Every decision you made was observed, recorded, evaluated. Your entire life in the household had been, in a sense, an extended job interview for a position you didn't know existed. Now that interview is over, you passed, and your real training is about to begin. Your training begins immediately, and it is more extensive and more brutal than you expected. You learn the art of horsemanship, but not the elegant riding of knights in their tournaments. Those men ride for show, for glory, for the admiration of ladies in the stands. What you learn is purely practical, focused entirely on one goal, covering long distances as quickly as possible without killing your mount. This is harder than it sounds. A horse pushed too hard will founder. Its muscles will give out. Its heart will fail. A horse not pushed hard enough will cost you time you cannot afford to lose. The courier's skill lies in finding the balance, in reading the animal beneath you, and knowing exactly how much you can demand. You learn to read your horse's breathing and adjust your pace accordingly. A certain rhythm of breath means you can push a little harder. A different rhythm means you need to slow down or risk serious damage. You learn to feel when a horse is about to stumble, and how to shift your weight to help it recover. A stumbling horse can mean a thrown rider, and a thrown rider on a lonely road might lie injured for days before anyone finds him. You learn which gaits are sustainable for hours and which will exhaust an animal in minutes. The smooth, ground-covering trot that eats up miles. The slower walk that lets a tired horse recover without stopping entirely. The brief bursts of gallop that can get you out of danger but cannot be maintained for long. You learn to care for horses on the road, to check their hooves for stones and their legs for swelling, to recognise the early signs of illness that might strand you far from any help. A courier who loses his horse is a courier who might not survive to complete his mission. You learn to read the sky for weather, with the intensity of a farmer watching his crops. The shape of clouds and the direction of wind can tell you whether rain is coming, whether a storm will pass quickly or settle in for days, whether you should push forward or seek shelter. You learn which kinds of cloud formations mean you should find cover immediately and which can be safely ignored. You learn that red sky at morning is a sailor's warning, and what that warning means for a man travelling overland. The weather can kill you just as surely as any bandit. Cold rain sapping your warmth until you can no longer think clearly. Storms that turn rivers into death traps and roads into impassable mud. Lightning that can strike without warning. Snow that can bury you while you sleep. You learn to identify landmarks that will guide you when roads disappear. A distinctive rock formation that looks like a sleeping giant. A tree struck by lightning years ago, its trunk split but still standing. The bend of a river at a particular spot where the current creates a recognisable pattern. A hill shaped like a woman's profile against the sky. These mental maps will be your navigation system in a world where written maps are rare, expensive, and often wildly inaccurate. The maps that exist show only the major roads in the largest cities. Everything else, all the small paths and shortcuts and local knowledge that can save a courier's life, exists only in the heads of men who have travelled these routes before. You memorise everything, every landmark, every direction, every piece of advice from older couriers who have survived long enough to have stories worth telling. You learn to judge how much you can push a horse before it collapses beneath you. The signs of exhaustion are subtle at first, but become unmistakable if you know what to look for. Foam at the mouth that doesn't dissipate, stumbling steps on level ground, a particular sound in the breathing, a wheeze that says the lungs are struggling, a head that hangs too low. Push past these warning signs and your horse will die under you, and then you'll be walking, and walking means failure in a job where speed is everything. You learn which rivers can be forded safely and which will sweep you to your death. The depth of the water isn't always visible from the bank. Murky water can hide drop-offs that will submerge horse and rider in an instant. The strength of the current isn't obvious until you're in the middle of it, fighting to keep your seat as the water tries to drag you downstream. You learn to look for the paths that local farmers use, worn into the riverbanks by generations of careful crossings. These established fords are usually the safest places to cross, chosen by people who knew the river intimately and selected the spots where the bottom was firm and the current was manageable. You learn to throw a stick into the water and watch how fast it moves, calculating whether your horse can keep its footing against that force. You learn to distrust any crossing that looks too convenient, because sometimes what looks easy is actually a trap. Bandits know about river crossings. They know that travellers slow down at fords, that horses struggle in water, that a man halfway across a river is at his most vulnerable. But the most important lessons are about the messages themselves. You're taught to memorise verbal messages perfectly, word for word. This is harder than it sounds. A message might be dozens of sentences long, filled with names and dates and specific phrases that must be reproduced exactly. Sometimes the letter you carry is just a cover story, a plausible excuse for your journey, and the real information lives only in your memory. Lords who trust no one, not even their own scribes, will whisper their true messages into your ear and expect you to deliver them with perfect accuracy. A single word changed could alter the meaning entirely. The king agrees is very different from the king may agree. Attack at dawn is very different from attack after dawn. These small distinctions could start a war or end an alliance. You practice memorization until your head aches. You repeat messages back to instructors who listen for the slightest variation. You recite them again and again until the words are burned into your brain, until you could repeat them accurately even if you were woken from deep sleep. You learn to recognize the different seals of noble houses, the distinctive impressions pressed into hot wax that serve as signatures in an age of widespread illiteracy. Each great family has its own seal, its own pattern that cannot be duplicated without the original signet ring. A lion rampant, a crossed pair of swords, a rose surrounded by thorns, an eagle with spread wings. You memorize them all, dozens of seals, each associated with a name and a territory and a political faction. You learn to spot a forgery, to notice when a seal has been lifted from one document and attached to another, to see the subtle signs that someone has tampered with a letter after it was sealed. You learn that a broken seal means a failed mission, and a failed mission means punishment. The seal is everything. It guarantees that the message was not read in transit, that the contents are exactly what the sender intended. Breaking a seal without authorization is a crime, sometimes punishable by death. Allowing someone else to break the seal is almost as bad. After weeks of training, the day finally comes when you're handed your first real assignment. A letter, folded carefully and sealed with the Lord's personal wax stamp, pressed with his signet ring in a pattern that cannot be duplicated by anyone else in the world. The parchment feels heavy in your hands, heavier than such a small piece of treated animal skin should feel. This single object, this product of a sheep's hide and a scribe's labour and a lord's decision, carries more weight than anything you've ever held. The steward tells you the destination, a manor house roughly 200 miles away, across territory that is sometimes friendly and sometimes hostile depending on the shifting politics of the region. The lord who lives there is allied with your master today, but those alliances shift like sand in a windstorm. By the time you arrive, everything might have changed. You have 12 days to get there and return. That means covering about 30 miles per day in good conditions. The conditions, he adds, with something that might be a smile, are never good. You're given a horse, a middling animal neither young nor old. She's strong enough for the journey, but not valuable enough that anyone will kill you to steal her. Her name is Nell, and she looks at you with large brown eyes that seem to understand what's coming. You're given a small pouch of coins for expenses, enough to buy food and lodging if you're careful, not enough to make you a tempting target for the thieves who haunt every road. You're given directions that sound simple. Follow the river north until you reach the old mill, then turn east along the ridge until you see the white rocks, then follow the valley to the village with the square church tower, and from there ask for directions to Lord Ashworth's estate. These directions will prove nearly useless once you're actually on the road, because the people who wrote them haven't made this journey in years, and the landscape has changed in ways they couldn't predict, and you're given a warning. "The letter you carry," the steward says, leaning forward across his desk with eyes that burn with intensity, "could change the course of a war that is brewing between your lord and his neighbour. It contains proposals for alliance, strategies for defence, information that could determine who lives and who dies in the coming conflict. Guard it with your life, because if you fail," he says, "your life won't be worth the parchment it's written on." You ride out through the castle gates as the sun climbs over the walls. The road stretches before you, winding through fields green with spring growth and into the dark edge of the forest beyond. Birds sing in the trees. The morning air is cool and pleasant against your face. For a brief moment, everything seems beautiful and full of promise. You think you're ready. You have no idea what awaits you. The first thing you learn about medieval roads is that they're barely roads at all. You've grown up hearing stories about the great Roman highways, those magnificent stone pathways that once stretched across the entire empire like the veins of a giant. The legions marched along them in perfect formation. Trade caravans rolled across them carrying goods from every corner of the known world. News travelled faster on those roads than anyone had thought possible. Some of them still exist technically. You can see traces of them if you know where to look. Straight lines cutting across the landscape, raised beds of gravel and stone that refuse to disappear even after centuries of neglect. But those centuries have not been kind. The Roman roads have been reduced to crumbling ruins. Their carefully fitted stones have been stolen by local villagers for building material, pried up one by one over generations until nothing remains but the impression in the earth where pavement used to be. Their sophisticated drainage systems are clogged with centuries of accumulated debris, leaves and mud, and the detritus of a civilization that no longer remembers how to maintain such things. What the Romans built to last forever has been slowly devoured by time and human need. What remains are the natural paths that people have worn into the landscape by the simple act of walking and riding the same routes year after year, decade after decade, century after century. These paths follow the path of least resistance, winding around obstacles rather than cutting through them, climbing hills at whatever angle the terrain demands, descending into valleys where water collects in stagnant pools. In summer, when the ground is dry, these roads are merely uncomfortable. The packed earth is hard under your horse's hooves, baked solid by the sun into something almost like stone. But that hardness comes with its own problems. The dust rises in clouds with every step. It coats your skin and clothes and lungs until you're coughing up grey mud at the end of each day. Your eyes sting with it. Your throat burns with it. You tie a cloth over your nose and mouth, but the fine particles find their way through every gap, every seam, every fold of fabric. By midday on your first day of travel, you look like a ghost, grey from head to foot, unrecognisable even to yourself. But summer dust is a minor inconvenience compared to what autumn and spring bring. Rain transforms these roads into something barely distinguishable from rivers. The water has nowhere to go. No drainage ditches channel it away. No paved surfaces shed it into gutters. It sits on the surface, mixing with the churned earth until the entire path becomes a channel of mud so deep that horses sink to their knees with every step. You can hear the sucking sound as each hoof pulls free. You can feel your mount straining against the grip of the earth that seems determined to swallow you both. Progress slows to a crawl. Miles that should take hours now take entire days, and the mud isn't just inconvenient, it's genuinely dangerous. Hidden beneath its surface are holes and rocks and roots that can snap a horse's leg like a dry twig. You can't see them until you're already standing on them, until your horse's hoof drops into a space that shouldn't exist and twists at an angle that no joint can tolerate. A broken leg means a dead horse, because no medieval veterinarian can set a horse's leg, and no horse can survive while such an injury heals. A dead horse, out here in the middle of nowhere with hundreds of miles still to travel, might mean a dead rider too. You experience this firsthand on your second day out. A storm rolled through during the night, thunder rattling the walls of the barn where you slept, lightning illuminating the countryside in brief, terrifying flashes. Though the morning sky is clear and blue, the road has transformed into something resembling a slow-moving river of chocolate pudding. Your horse Nell protests with every step. You can feel her legs straining against the suction of the mud, hear the wet squelch as each hoof pulls free. She tosses her head in frustration, her eyes rolling with something that might be fear or might be anger at being forced through such misery. You try to comfort her, to urge her forward with gentle words and a steady hand on her neck. But even you are beginning to despair. At this rate, you'll never make your deadline. In some places, the mud is so bad that parallel paths form on either side of the main road, created by desperate travellers seeking firmer ground. These path bundles can spread across hundreds of feet, with each new track becoming impassable in turn as more and more travellers churn through it. What was once a single road becomes a maze of muddy trenches, and choosing the wrong one can cost you hours of struggle for no gain at all. You pass the remains of a cart that ventured out too soon after the rain. Its wheels are buried up to the axles, sunk so deep into the mud that extracting them would require a team of oxen and considerable patience. Its wooden frame has begun to rot where it sits, the damp seeping into the grain and starting the slow process of decay. Its cargo, whatever it was, has been looted and scattered. Shattered crates lie in the mud around the cart like the bones of some wooden beast. Fragments of cloth flutter in the breeze. Whatever was being transported is long gone, taken by opportunists who saw an easy target. Of the driver, there's no sign. Maybe he made it to shelter. Maybe he tried to continue on foot and reach the next village safely. Maybe something else found him first. The forests are full of dangers, and a man alone and on foot is vulnerable to all of them. You don't investigate too closely. You have your own problems to worry about. The worst roads of all are the holloways. These are ancient paths that have been worn so deep by centuries of traffic that they've become sunken lanes, trenches cut into the hillsides with walls of earth rising on either side like the ramparts of a fortress. Some of them are 10 feet deep, carved into the landscape by countless hooves and wheels, and boots passing along the same route for hundreds of years. Some are even deeper, narrow canyons where the sky is just a ribbon of light far above. In dry weather, holloways are merely claustrophobic. You ride through them with walls of earth blocking your view in every direction, unable to see what lies ahead or behind, trusting that nothing dangerous waits around the next bend. The air is still and close, trapped in these narrow channels where wind rarely reaches. The sounds of the world above are muffled, distant. It feels like travelling through a grave that hasn't quite finished digging itself. In wet weather, holloways become death traps. Water flowing down the hillside has nowhere to go except into the holloway, turning it into a channel that can fill with flash floods in minutes. Travellers have drowned in these sunken roads, swept away by torrents of muddy water before they could climb the steep banks. The walls that seemed merely inconvenient become prison walls, impossible to scale while water rises around you. You learn to watch the sky obsessively when travelling through holloways. You learn to listen for the distant rumble of thunder that might herald a deadly flood. You learn to identify the spots where the banks are low enough to climb if you have to abandon your horse and scramble for higher ground. River crossings are another constant threat to your survival. In an ideal world, there would be bridges at every crossing. Stone arches spanning the water, allowing travellers to pass safely above the current. Solid construction that laughed at floods and storms. In the real medieval world, bridges are rare luxuries. Building a bridge requires money, labour, engineering, knowledge that most communities simply don't possess. Maintaining a bridge requires ongoing investment that most lords would rather spend on castles and armies, and the endless expenses of noble life. So bridges exist only on the most important routes, and everywhere else, travellers must find their own way across. More commonly, you have to ford the river directly. This means riding your horse through water that might be ankle deep or neck deep, depending on recent rainfall, trusting that the bottom is solid enough to support you both. You've learned to read rivers the hard way. What looks like a gentle stream can hide powerful currents beneath its placid surface. What appears to be a shallow crossing can conceal drop-offs that will submerge horse and rider in an instant. You learn to look for the paths that local farmers use, worn into the riverbanks by generations of traffic. These established fords are usually the safest places to cross, chosen by people who knew the river intimately and selected the spots where the bottom was firm and the current was manageable. You learn to throw a stick into the water and watch how fast it moves downstream, calculating whether your horse can keep its footing against that force. You learn to distrust any crossing that looks too convenient, because sometimes what looks easy is actually a trap. Bandits know about river crossings. They know that travellers slow down at fords, that horses struggle to move quickly through water, that a man crossing a river is at his most vulnerable. They wait on the far bank with weapons drawn, or they hide in the brush on both sides and attack when you're in the middle of the current, unable to retreat or advance quickly. A struggling horse and rider in waist-deep water make easy targets. The Florence merchants of your era had expectations for their couriers that seem almost fantastical given these conditions. A letter from Florence to Paris, about 700 miles, should take 20 to 22 days. Florence to Bruges, 800 miles, should take less than 25 days. Florence to London, 1,000 miles, including a channel crossing where weather could delay ships for days or weeks, should arrive in under 30 days. But these were professional couriers on established routes. They rode well-maintained horses and changed mounts at regular intervals. They had support networks that provided fresh horses and reliable information about road conditions. They travelled routes that had been used for decades, with established relationships at inns and waypoints along the way. You have none of that. You have one tired horse, already straining from the difficult conditions. You have a handful of coins that will run out long before your journey's complete if you're not careful. You have directions that tell you to follow the river until you reach the old oak, then turn north until you see the church spire. The old oak you discover on your third day was struck by lightning 3 winters ago and is now an unrecognisable stump. Split down the middle and rotting from within, it looks like any of 100 other dead trees you've passed. The church spire was torn down by raiders last spring, its stone carted away to build defensive walls elsewhere. The village it marked still exists, but finding it without the spire requires asking directions from farmers who don't entirely trust you. Your landmarks have abandoned you. The directions you were given are useless, and you're losing time with every wrong turn. You spend half a day wandering through woods that all look the same, your horse growing more exhausted with every mile, your deadline growing closer with every wasted hour. The sun moves across the sky, your only reliable compass, but it tells you only general directions, not specific routes. East is east, and west is west. But that doesn't help when you need to find a particular manor house in a particular valley. When you finally stumble across a village and pay a farmer to point you in the right direction, you've lost nearly a full day of travel. You try to make it up by riding into the night. The darkness brings its own terrors. Medieval nights are dark in a way that modern people cannot truly comprehend. There are no streetlights lining the roads. There are no lit windows in distant houses, no ambient glow from cities over the horizon. When the sun sets and the moon hides behind clouds, the world becomes a void of absolute blackness. Your torch reveals only a few feet of road ahead, a small circle of flickering orange light surrounded by an infinity of darkness. Beyond that circle of illumination, anything could be waiting, anything at all. You ride with your hand on your sword and your heart in your throat, jumping at every sound. An owl hooting becomes the signal of an ambush. A branch snapping under the weight of some forest creature becomes a bandit stepping out of the shadows. The wind itself seems to carry whispers of danger, threats murmured just below the threshold of hearing. The darkness plays tricks on your mind. You see shapes that aren't there. You hear voices that might be imagination or might be something worse. You start to wonder if you're going mad. By dawn, you're so exhausted from fear and sleeplessness that you can barely stay in the saddle. Your eyes burn, your hands shake, every shadow looks like a threat, and you've forgotten what safety feels like. And dawn, when it finally comes pink and gold over the eastern hills, brings little relief. Because somewhere out there, waiting in the forests and hills, are the people who make their living by preying on travellers like you, the bandits. There's a saying you'll hear in taverns and around campfires throughout the medieval world. Highwaymen are as common as crows. It's not an exaggeration. It's not colourful language used for dramatic effect. It's a simple statement of fact about the dangerous world you now inhabit. The roads of medieval Europe are hunting grounds for desperate men who have nothing left to lose and everything to gain from robbing travellers. These aren't the romantic outlaws of legend. Noble rogues who steal from the rich and give to the poor, who tip their hats to ladies and never harm the innocent. That's the stuff of ballads sung in warm taverns by men who have never faced a drawn blade on a lonely road. The reality is far uglier. Some bandits might have started with something resembling noble intentions. Perhaps they were disbanded soldiers with no wars to fight, men who had spent years learning to kill and found themselves with no legitimate employment for their terrible skills. The wars end, the armies disband, and suddenly thousands of men who know nothing but violence are released into a countryside that has no use for them. Or perhaps they were peasants driven from their land by famine, watching their families starve while they had no legal way to feed them. When your children are crying from hunger and the Lord's men come to collect taxes you cannot pay, desperate choices start to seem reasonable. Steal or watch your family die. What would you choose? Desperation drives men to terrible acts, and the medieval world provides plenty of desperation to go around. But whatever nobility might have once existed has been stripped away by years of living outside the law. The bandits you'll encounter aren't tragic heroes fallen on hard times. They're simply predators, and you are prey. They'll kill you for the coins in your pouch or the horse between your legs. They'll kill you just because you saw their faces and might be able to identify them later. They'll kill you because violence has become so routine that they no longer think of it as remarkable. Murder is just business. Your death is just another transaction. Their techniques are crude but effective, refined by years of experience and the hard teacher of survival. A favourite tactic involves stringing ropes across the road at night. The ropes are positioned at exactly the right height to catch an unwary rider across the chest or throat. At best, you're dragged from your horse and land hard on the packed earth, the wind knocked out of you. At worst, the rope catches your neck and breaks it, before you even understand what's happening. Before you can recover from the fall while you're still gasping for breath and trying to understand what happened, they're on you with clubs and knives. Speed is everything in banditry. A quick, brutal attack gives the victim no time to resist or escape. They hit hard and fast and take what they want and disappear back into the forest before anyone can respond. Another method is simpler, but requires patience. They hide in the forest near a natural choke point, a river crossing where travellers must slow down, a narrow pass between hills where there's nowhere to run, a stretch of road where thick brush grows close on either side, blocking any escape route, anywhere that forces travellers to slow down and commit to a path from which retreat is difficult. Then they swarm. They emerge from the undergrowth in numbers that make resistance pointless. 4 men, 6 men, sometimes a dozen, if the target is valuable enough. They surround you before you can draw your weapon, before you can spur your horse into a gallop, before you can do anything at all except die or surrender. Some bandits work alone, watching the roads for solitary travellers who make easy targets. A man without companions, a woman without protectors, anyone who looks weak or distracted or lost. These lone wolves are often the most desperate and the most dangerous, willing to take risks that a more cautious gang would avoid. Others operate in organised gangs with lookouts and signals and established territories. The most successful gangs have relationships with corrupt officials who warn them when law enforcement is coming. They have merchants who buy stolen goods without asking questions. They have informants in villages and towns who tell them when wealthy travellers are expected. These organised gangs are businesses, criminal enterprises run with the same attention to profit and loss as any legitimate merchant house. The famous Horace Walpole once wrote that one is forced to travel, even at noon, as if one was going to battle. He wasn't exaggerating. In particularly dangerous regions, travellers hire armed escorts, forming small caravans that present a more formidable target. Merchants travelling with valuable goods might employ a dozen guards, turning their trading expedition into a small military operation. Noblemen travelling through hostile territory bring retinues of armed men who can discourage all but the most ambitious attackers. But escorts cost money you don't have. Every coin you spend on protection is a coin you can't spend on food or lodging, and you don't have much to begin with. Your expense allowance was calculated for the journey itself, not for the small army you'd need to travel in perfect safety. More importantly, escorts slow you down when speed is essential. A group of people travels slower than a single rider. Guards argue about routes and strategy. Horses need to be rested at different times. The very protection that keeps you safe makes it harder to meet your deadline. The steward's words echo in your mind. Guard the letter with your life. But what good is a letter delivered late? What good is a message that arrives after the decisions it was meant to influence have already been made? So you travel alone, and you hope. The Black Chrysostoph of Silesia was active between 1500 and 1512, which is after your time in this story, but men like him have always existed. Every era has its monsters. Every generation knows their names. He was a knight, technically a nobleman, with land and title and the protection of law. He swore oaths to God and king. He was baptized and confirmed and all the other sacraments of a Christian life. But he made his living robbing merchants and travellers on the roads near his estate. His reputation for cruelty spread far enough to enter the historical record. He didn't just rob his victims. He tortured them for amusement, finding entertainment in their screams. He mutilated them to send messages to other travellers, leaving survivors marked with wounds that would never fully heal. He killed them for sport when he grew bored with their suffering. Stories spread of travellers who disappeared on roads near his territory. Bodies found in ditches with marks that suggested something worse than mere robbery. Screams heard in the night from his castle walls. And when he was finally brought to justice, it was only because he had become so notorious that ignoring him was no longer politically possible. His crimes were so public, so extreme, that the authorities could no longer pretend not to notice. But lesser bandits operated for decades without interference. They were protected by the indifference of authorities who had more pressing concerns, by the difficulty of patrolling vast territories with limited resources, by a justice system that worked slowly and ineffectively against men who knew how to hide. You encounter bandits on the 4th day of your journey. You're picking your way through a stretch of forest, following a path that looks well-travelled enough to be relatively safe. The trees are tall here, old growth that blocks most of the sunlight and creates a permanent twilight beneath the canopy. The air is cool and damp, carrying the smell of rotting leaves and growing things. It seems peaceful. After days of struggle and fear, this stretch of forest feels almost welcoming. You've let your guard down slightly, thinking about the letter in your satchel and how many more miles you have to cover. A man steps out of the trees ahead of you. He's holding a crossbow. The bolt is already loaded and the string is pulled back, ready to fire. The weapon is aimed at your chest. You know enough about crossbows to understand that at this range, even the cheapest, most poorly maintained crossbow could punch through whatever you're wearing. You wouldn't even have time to be surprised before the bolt was through your heart. Behind you, you hear the rustle of movement. When you turn to look, 2 more men have emerged to block your retreat. They're carrying clubs and knives, and their eyes are hard with the kind of calculation that comes from having done this many times before. Professional eyes, predator eyes, eyes that have watched men die and felt nothing but the satisfaction of a job well done. The man with the crossbow approaches slowly. He's younger than you expected, barely more than a boy, with hollow cheeks and eyes that are far too old for his face. Hunger has carved away any softness he might once had. He looks like someone who has seen terrible things and done some of them himself. He asks what you're carrying. Just a letter, you tell. Him. Your voice is steady, which surprises you. A letter for the Lord of Thornbury Manor. Nothing valuable. He doesn't believe you. Why would he? Couriers carry coins for expenses. Sometimes they carry valuable gifts for the message's recipient. Gold or jewels or precious fabrics intended to sweeten the content of the letter. Sometimes the letter itself can be sold to interested parties, people who would pay good money to know what powerful lords are saying to each other. He gestures for you to dismount. What happens next depends on many factors. Your luck, your skill with the sword at your hip, which isn't much, your willingness to fight against odds that heavily favour them. Most importantly, it depends on whether they decide you're more valuable alive or dead. Some couriers in this situation have talked their way out. They convince the bandits that robbing a messenger will bring down the wrath of powerful lords. The wax seal on your letter is your protection, in theory. It marks you as operating under the authority of someone important, someone who will seek revenge if you're harmed. Breaking that seal, harming that messenger, is an attack on the Lord himself. But bandits don't always think that far ahead. They're hungry and desperate, and you have things they want. The seal on your letter is just wax to them, meaningless symbols pressed into a soft substance by some lord they'll never meet. Your horse is worth more than any noble's vengeance, and nobles rarely bother to avenge dead messengers anyway. Messengers are replaceable. Bandits are hard to catch. The calculus of vengeance rarely adds up in your favour. You have a sword, but you're not trained to use it well. You're a courier, not a soldier. The crossbow aimed at your chest would fire long before you could draw your blade. The bolt would be through your heart before you could take a single step. So you do what survivors do. You dismount. You hand over your coin pouch, watching months of saved wages disappear into a stranger's pocket. The coins make a soft clinking sound as they change hands, the sound of your hopes and plans vanishing into someone else's future. You try to keep the letter hidden. pressed against your body under your clothes, but they search you thoroughly, rough hands checking every fold of fabric and every seam of your clothing. When they find the letter, they don't know what to do with it. They can't read. None of them can. The letter is just parchment to them, meaningless marks on animal skin. One of them suggests burning it anyway, just to be cruel, just to deprive you of the thing you were clearly trying to protect. Another thinks they might be able to sell it to someone. Surely there's a market for stolen letters. The argument saves your life, or at least delays your death. While they're distracted, arguing among themselves about the value of something they don't understand, you spot an opening in the trees, a gap in their attention, a moment when no one is looking, directly at you. You run. The crossbow bolt misses your head by inches, thudding into a tree trunk as you crash through the undergrowth. Branches scratch your face. Roots try to trip you. You run until your lungs burn and your legs give out, until you collapse in a ravine and lie there gasping and sobbing and very much alive. You've lost your horse. You've lost your money. But somehow, impossibly, you still have the letter. You tucked it into your boot before they searched you. A desperate gamble that somehow paid off. The seal is cracked but not broken. The message is still intact. The mission isn't failed yet. You're 30 miles from your destination with no horse, no money, and no idea where you are. The sun is setting. You're bleeding from a dozen scratches, and somewhere behind you, bandits might be searching for the courier who got away. But you're alive, and you have a job to finish. Medieval couriers understood something that modern people often forget. The weather isn't just an inconvenience. It's a force of nature that can kill you as easily as any bandit, as surely as any sword. The sky itself is a threat, and you learn to watch it with the same wariness you watch the tree line for ambushes. The medieval climate, particularly during the period historians call the Little Ice Age, was brutally unpredictable. Summers could be scorching enough to dry up water sources and kill horses from heat exhaustion. The sun beat down on open roads with merciless intensity, baking the earth until it cracked and drawing moisture from every living thing. Winters could be cold enough to freeze rivers solid and bury roads under feet of snow. Men who ventured out unprepared simply never returned. Their bodies found months later when the spring thaw revealed what the winter had claimed, and the transitions between seasons brought storms that could reshape the landscape overnight. Rain that fell for days without stopping, wind that tore trees from the ground, lightning that set forests ablaze. The medieval world had no weather forecasts, no advanced warning systems. Storms arrived like invading armies, and you either found shelter or you suffered. There's a record of a storm that struck Portugal in October of 1384. The Chronicle describes it as the heaviest rains that man had ever seen or heard of. The words were written by someone who had lived through many storms, who had seen the worst that nature could offer, and yet this particular tempest exceeded everything in memory. The downpour was so intense that roads became impassable within hours. Paths that had been dry and firm that morning became rivers of mud by afternoon. River crossings were swept away, bridges torn from their moorings and carried downstream like toys in a child's bath. In Lisbon, the flooding damaged buildings throughout the city. The king's own army, preparing for a siege, was scattered and lost in the darkness when the storm hit. Soldiers who had trained together for months couldn't find each other in the chaos. Units that had been marching in formation found themselves isolated, unable to see or hear their companions, unable to maintain any kind of order. An army with siege engines and supply wagons, with thousands of men and horses, with all the organisational power of a medieval kingdom behind it, was brought to a standstill by a single night of rain. What chance does one courier have against such forces? You experience this firsthand on your 6th day of travel. You're on foot now, having lost your horse to the bandits. Every mile takes longer than it should. Your feet are blistered and bleeding inside boots that were never designed for long-distance walking. The leather rubs against your skin with every step, creating friction that tears the flesh. You've been making progress, but not enough. The deadline looms closer with every hour, and you're moving far too slowly to meet it. The letter in your boot feels heavier with every mile, as if the weight of your potential failure is adding to its physical mass. A storm rolls in from the west. You can see it coming long before it arrives. A wall of black cloud advancing across the sky like an army on the march. Lightning flickers inside it. brief flashes that illuminate the interior of the cloud mass in shades of purple and white. The wind picks up, carrying the smell of rain and something else, something that feels like electricity on your skin. You know you need to find shelter fast, but there is no shelter. You're in open countryside, rolling hills covered with grass and scattered shrubs, but not a tree or building in sight. The nearest village is miles behind you. The nearest forest is miles ahead. You're exposed on the open road with nowhere to hide. The landscape offers nothing, no barns, no ruins, no overhangs of rock, just grass and sky and the approaching storm. When the rain hits, it's like standing under a waterfall. Within seconds, you're soaked to the bone. The water runs down your face and into your eyes, blinding you. It soaks through your clothes and your boots, filling them with cold liquid that squelches with every step. Within minutes, you can barely see your hand in front of your face. The path you were following has disappeared, transformed into a stream of muddy water rushing downhill. The marks that told you where to walk have been erased by the flood. Everything looks the same, grey and wet and hostile. You keep walking because stopping means dying. The cold seeps into your bones, drawing out your body heat faster than you can generate it. Your teeth chatter so violently you worry they'll crack. Your fingers turn white, then blue, then you can't feel them at all. The medieval world has no word for hypothermia, but it has plenty of graves for travellers who died of it. Exposure kills more travellers than bandits ever will. When you finally stumble across a shepherd's hut, abandoned but still mostly waterproof, you collapse inside and lie, there shivering for hours. The hut is barely larger than a closet, built of rough stone with a thatched roof that leaks in several places, but it's shelter. You strip off your wet clothes and wrap yourself in the musty blankets you find piled in the corner. They smell of sheep and mildew and something that might be dried blood, but you don't care. They're dry, they're warm, they might save your life. You don't sleep so much as pass out, your body shutting down to conserve what little warmth remains. Your dreams, such as they are full of cold water and darkness. The morning brings clear skies and the kind of crisp cold that makes every breath feel like inhaling knives. Your clothes are still damp, but you can't wait for them to dry completely. You've already lost too much time. You pull on the clammy fabric, trying not to gag at the feel of it against your skin, and you start walking again. The physical demands of the courier's life are relentless. Every day you rise before dawn and start moving. Every night you keep going until darkness or exhaustion forces you to stop. In between, you walk or ride for 12, 14, 16 hours at a stretch, covering distances that would exhaust a fresh man in perfect conditions. You're never fresh. Conditions are never perfect. Your feet develop blisters that become calluses that become open sores. The leather of your boots, damp from rain and stream crossings, rubs against your skin until you're leaving bloody footprints on the road. You learn to wrap your feet in strips of cloth torn from your spare shirt to provide some protection, but nothing really helps. The pain becomes a constant companion, always there, always demanding attention. Your legs cramp from the endless miles. Your back aches from sleeping on hard ground or hunching over during long days of walking. Your shoulders develop knots so tight that turning your head becomes an exercise in agony. There are no hot baths in the medieval world, no massage therapists, no painkillers stronger than alcohol. You drink when you can afford it and suffer when you can't. Sleep becomes something you steal in fragments. An hour here in a sheltered hollow, 2 hours there in an abandoned building. Never enough, never truly restful. Your body exists in a permanent state of partial recovery, always trying to heal from the damage you've inflicted, always falling behind. The dark circles under your eyes become permanent fixtures. Your movements slow, your thoughts become fuzzy around the edges. You catch yourself making simple mistakes that you never would have made when you were rested. Food is fuel, nothing more. You eat whatever you can get, whenever you can get it. Dried meat that tastes like leather and requires half an hour of chewing to become swallowable. Bread that's more mould than grain, the green spots scraped off with a knife before you force yourself to eat what remains. Cheese that's turned so hard you could use it as a weapon, occasionally. You can afford a hot meal at an inn, something with vegetables and flavour and the illusion of nourishment. Those meals are rare treasures, remembered and savoured long after they're finished. The medieval world is also a world of illness. There is no germ theory, no understanding of how diseases spread. The tiny creatures that cause sickness are invisible, their existence unsuspected. What exists instead is a belief in bad air, in divine punishment, in imbalances of bodily humours that must be corrected through bleeding and purging. What exists is a constant background hum of sickness, a lottery of infection that everyone plays every day. As a courier, you're particularly vulnerable. You sleep in different places every night, exposed to whatever diseases circulate in each location. The inn that seemed pleasant might harbour plague. The barn where you sheltered might be home to rats carrying deadly illnesses. Every surface you touch, every person you encounter, every drop of water you drink is a potential source of infection. You drink water from streams and wells that might be contaminated. Upstream, someone might have dumped a body. Someone might have emptied a chamber pot. You have no way of knowing. The water looks clear. You drink it anyway because the alternative is dying of thirst. You eat food that might be spoiled, prepared by hands that might be carrying illness. The innkeeper who serves you dinner might be incubating a fever that will kill half the village by next week. The bread you bought from a roadside vendor might have been touched by fingers that touched something unspeakable. Every inn you stay in is a potential disease incubator. Every village you pass through carries its own complement of sicknesses. Every person you interact with is a risk. You get sick on the 8th day of your journey. It starts with a stomach cramp that doubles you over. At first you think it's just bad food. Maybe the meat you ate last night that tasted slightly off. But within hours, you're vomiting everything you've eaten for the past day. The dysentery follows, an endless evacuation that leaves you weak and shaking. You find a hollow in the trees where you can at least have some privacy for your humiliation. The leaves are damp beneath you. The cold seeps into your bones. And you lie there for most of a day, too sick to move, too weak to continue. The letter is still in your boot. That's the only thought you can hold on to. The letter is still there. The mission isn't failed. Not yet. When the worst of it passes, you're so weak you can barely stand. Your legs shake, your head spins. Every step feels like climbing a mountain. But you stand anyway. You stagger back to the road. You keep walking. There's a phrase you've heard since childhood. Don't kill the messenger. It's supposed to be a protection. A universal understanding that the person carrying news shouldn't be blamed for the content of that news. In an ideal world, it would work. The messenger is just the vessel. Punishing the vessel doesn't change the message. The medieval world is not ideal. The truth about messengers and the messages they carry is complicated. On one hand, diplomatic immunity has existed in various forms for thousands of years. The ancient Greeks recognized the sacred status of heralds, men chosen by the gods to carry words between armies. The Romans codified protections for envoys under their concept of jus gentium, the law of nations. Medieval European jurists built on these foundations, creating legal frameworks that theoretically protected messengers from harm. The Church declared that harming a messenger was a sin. Kings issued proclamations guaranteeing the safety of diplomatic envoys. In practice, those protections are only as strong as the self-interest of the recipient. A lord who wants to maintain good relations with his neighbours will treat their messengers well. He knows that his own envoys depend on the same courtesy being extended in return. Harm a messenger, and your own messengers might be harmed. Kill an envoy, and you've started a cycle of violence that will claim your own people as victims. This is cold calculation, not morality. But it usually works. But a lord who is angry or drunk, or simply doesn't care about consequences, might take out his frustrations on whoever happens to be standing in front of him. Rational thought and diplomatic calculation disappear when rage takes over. The letter you carry might contain good news, an offer of alliance perhaps, word of a favourable marriage arrangement, news of a victory in battle that advances the recipient's interests. In that case, you'll be treated well. The recipient might even reward you for bringing such welcome tidings. Coins, a warm meal, a soft bed for the night. You've heard of messengers who received gifts so valuable that a single delivery could set them up for life. A grateful lord pleased with the news might give a messenger a horse, a suit of clothes, a pouch of gold. Generosity flows freely when the news is good. But the letter might contain bad news, a demand for payment of an old debt, an accusation of treachery, word that a battle has been lost, news that a family member has died, an enemy has gained advantage, an alliance has crumbled. In those cases, the messenger's position becomes precarious. Rational people understand that you're just the carrier. Killing you won't change the contents of the letter. It won't bring back the dead or restore the lost alliance. The bad news remains bad regardless of what happens to the messenger. But not everyone is rational. especially when confronted with information they don't want to hear. There are stories. Everyone knows them. The messenger who delivered news of a military defeat and was beaten within an inch of his life by the grieving general. His body broken, his face unrecognisable, left to crawl home as best he could. The courier who brought word of a papal excommunication and was thrown into a dungeon to rot. He spent years in darkness, forgotten by everyone except the rats that shared his cell. The envoy who informed a king that his wife had been unfaithful and never left the castle alive. His body was never found. His family never learned what happened to him. Some of these stories might be exaggerated, some might be entirely invented, cautionary tales passed down to frighten new couriers into humility. But they all serve the same purpose, to remind you that your job comes with risks no amount of legal protection can entirely eliminate. You think about this as you approach your destination. You don't know what's in the letter you carry. You are explicitly ordered not to read it, and even if you'd wanted to, the seal prevented you from doing so without destroying the evidence. For all you know, you're carrying a declaration of war. You could be walking into a castle full of people who would very much like to shoot the messenger. But you've come too far to stop now. The letter must be delivered. Whatever happens after that is in God's hands, or fate's hands, or simply the hands of the men waiting inside. The manor house appears on the horizon as the sun begins to set. It's smaller than your lord's castle, but still impressive. Stone walls, a wooden gate, guards visible on the battlements. The banner of Lord Ashworth flutters from a pole above the gate, the device unfamiliar to you but clearly marking this as your destination. You approach slowly, hands visible, trying to look as unthreatening as possible. A ragged, exhausted man on foot covered in mud and scratches is not an impressive sight, but the letter in your boot gives you authority. You announce yourself to the guards, you state your business, you show them the seal on the letter, proof that you carry words from a lord of significance. They let you in. What follows is almost anticlimactic. You're brought before Lord Ashworth's steward. He examines the seal, notes that it's cracked but not broken, and accepts the letter. You're given a few coins for your trouble, not enough to replace what the bandits took, but enough to buy food for the journey home. You're given a response to carry back, another sealed letter, another precious cargo of secrets, and now you have to do it all again in reverse. The return journey is almost worse than the outward one. You've made it to your destination. You've delivered the letter. You've received confirmation that the message arrived intact. The steward's nod of acknowledgement, curt as it was, represented success. Your mission, in that narrow sense, was accomplished. Now you have to do it all again in reverse. 200 miles back to your master's castle, through the same dangerous roads, past the same bandit-haunted forests, across the same treacherous rivers. Except now, you're even more exhausted than before. Your body has been pushed past its limits, and is only functioning through sheer stubbornness and the animal instinct for survival. You've lost weight you couldn't afford to lose. Your clothes hang on your frame like sacks. Your boots are falling apart, the leather separating from the soles in places that let water and mud seep in with every step. The scratches from your flight through the forest have scabbed over but still ache. But there's no rest available. Your lord expects you back within a specific time frame. Delays need to be explained. If you take too long, questions will be asked. Were you robbed? Yes, actually. But admitting that might raise uncomfortable questions about your ability to protect the messages you carry. Were you injured? Yes, in a dozen small ways, but showing weakness is dangerous in a world where weakness invites exploitation. Did you stop at every tavern between here and there? Did you spend the travel money on something other than travel? Each question implies suspicion, and suspicion leads to consequences. A messenger who can't be trusted is no messenger at all. A courier who fails is replaced, and the replacement isn't gentle. So you push on, day after day, mile after mile. You find ways to save time on the return journey. You remember the wrong turns you made on the way out and avoid them now. You recognize landmarks that confused you before. The road that seemed so unfamiliar has become slightly more known. But every shortcut has its risks. Every deviation from the established path might lead you into danger you could have avoided, and you're so tired that making good decisions has become difficult. Your thoughts wander, your attention drifts. You catch yourself walking for miles without any memory of the ground you covered, your body moving automatically while your mind floats somewhere else entirely. The Mongol Yam system, you've heard, could move messages 200 or 250 miles in a single day. The Mongol Empire, stretched across the largest land area ever ruled by a single government, built a network of relay stations across its vast territories. At each station, fresh horses waited. At each station, riders could hand off their messages to new carriers who weren't exhausted from the previous leg. The stations were spaced every 25 to 45 miles, close enough that a horse could gallop the entire distance at full speed without wearing out. Each station maintained 200 or more horses, ensuring that fresh mounts were always available. The riders were specialists trained from childhood to spend their lives in the saddle. Some accounts claim these Mongol riders tied themselves to their horses with bands around their heads, chests and stomachs. This prevented them from falling off even if they lost consciousness from exhaustion. They could sleep in the saddle, their bodies swaying with the horse's motion, covering miles even as they rested. The result was a communication system that could span continents in weeks. A message could travel from the western edge of the empire to the eastern edge, thousands of miles in less time than it would take you to walk from one English village to the next. By comparison, you're practically standing still. European medieval systems had nothing like this infrastructure. There were no relay stations. There were no networks of fresh horses. There was just you, alone, covering distances that would have been handled by a dozen Mongol riders working in sequence. The Persian Angarium system, centuries before the Mongols, achieved similar speeds. Messages could travel 2,600 kilometers in 7 to 9 days, from Susa to Sardis. The Greeks marveled at it, calling it the fastest thing on earth, and here you are, shuffling along a muddy road, hoping to make 30 miles before nightfall. The Florentine merchants of your era eventually developed their own solution. In 1357, 17 merchant houses pooled their resources to create a shared courier network called the Scasella dei Mercanti. By combining their purchasing power, they could afford regular service to major trading centres, regular routes, regular schedules, regular deliveries. But this system served merchants, not minor lords. It carried commercial correspondence, not diplomatic secrets. And it wouldn't exist for decades yet. For now, you're on your own. The physical toll of courier work accumulates with every journey. In your first weeks, you could recover from a long ride with a night's sleep and a hot meal. Your young body bounced back from exertion. Muscle soreness faded. Blisters healed. You woke each morning feeling renewed. That recovery time stretches longer with each assignment. Now you need 2 nights to feel human again, then 3. Then a full week of rest barely suffices to prepare you for the next journey, and the rest never comes. There's always another message, another deadline, another road stretching into the distance. Saddle sores that once healed between journeys become permanent features of your anatomy. Your back, bent for hours over a horse's neck, develops a curve that never quite straightens. Your legs, wrapped around a horse's barrel for countless miles, bow outward in a shape that makes walking feel unnatural. The old couriers you meet, the ones who have been doing this for decades, move like men twice their age. They walk with limps earned from falls and accidents. They grip cups with hands that tremble from old injuries. Their eyes are squinted from years of staring into sun and rain. Their bodies are bent and broken before their time, worn out by a profession that treats human beings like machinery. You see your future in their faces and try not to think about it. The secrets you carry are both protection and danger. As a messenger, you know things. You can't help it. Even if you never break a seal, even if you never read a word of the letters you deliver, you absorb information simply by doing your job. You know who is communicating with whom. You know which lords are allied and which are enemies. You know when important meetings are scheduled. You know the names of people who matter and the locations of places that are significant. This knowledge makes you valuable to people who collect information. Spies exist in the medieval world, just as they exist in every world. They work for lords and kings, for bishops and merchants, for foreign powers and domestic rivals. They pay for secrets. They pay well. A courier who is willing to talk can sell information for more money than years of legitimate wages would provide. A single betrayal, carefully managed, could set a man up for life. The case of Thomas Turberville serves as a warning. Turberville was a minor English nobleman captured by the French during one of the endless wars between the two kingdoms. While in captivity, he was turned into a spy. The French offered him freedom and gold in exchange for information about English military preparations. He agreed. He was released. He went home to England and began gathering intelligence for his French handlers, but his own messenger betrayed him. The courier who carried his secret reports to France decided that loyalty to England was worth more than the coins Turbeville paid him. He brought the reports to King Edward I instead. Turbeville was arrested, tried, and executed. His body was dragged through the streets of London as a warning to others. His name became synonymous with treachery, and the messenger who betrayed him. He was rewarded, certainly, but he also had to live with the knowledge that his actions had led to a man's death. Whether that bothered him or not, the historical record doesn't say. In 1326, King Edward II ordered a massive spy search throughout England. All merchants and messengers were detained if they were found carrying suspicious letters. The king's agents opened correspondence, read private communications, searched for signs of conspiracy. They found what they were looking for or claimed to. Conspiracies were exposed. Traitors were executed. The king used the emergency to consolidate power and punish his enemies. But the innocent suffered alongside the guilty. Messengers who carried nothing more sinister than love letters or business correspondence were detained and questioned. Some were tortured to ensure they were telling the truth. The mere act of carrying a sealed letter became grounds for suspicion. You think about this sometimes, late at night, when sleep refuses to come. The letter in your possession might be innocent. Routine correspondence between nobles, nothing that anyone would care about, or it might be dangerous. Evidence of conspiracy, plans for rebellion, secrets that powerful men would kill to keep hidden. You don't know. You can't know. The seal prevents you from reading the contents, and even if you could read them, you might not understand the significance of what you found. Couriers could sell information for more than years of legitimate wages would provide. The temptation is always there. A word here, a detail there, nothing that could be traced back to you. Just enough to earn a few extra coins from someone who pays well for rumours and whispers. But the punishments for betrayal are severe. Execution, of course. Torture first to extract the names of accomplices and the extent of the damage. Branding as a traitor, which means that even if you survived, you would be unemployable forever after. A man marked as untrustworthy in the medieval world faces a slow starvation. No one will hire him. No one will house him. He becomes an outcast, despised by everyone, until hunger or violence claims him. The risk isn't worth it. You tell yourself that every time the temptation whispers in your ear. You keep your mouth shut. You deliver your letters. You try not to think about the secrets you carry and what they might mean. But the knowledge accumulates anyway. You can't help noticing patterns. You can't help remembering faces and names and destinations. Your mind files away information without your permission, and somewhere, someone is probably watching you, wondering if you can be turned, wondering what you might know, wondering if you're worth approaching with an offer. That thought keeps you awake on more nights than you'd like to admit. The return to your lord's castle feels less like triumph than like survival. You stagger through the gates just as the sun is setting 12 days after you left. The same guards who watched you ride out now watch you stumble in. Their expressions are carefully neutral, but you can see the assessment in their eyes. You look terrible. You know you look terrible. Your clothes are torn and stained. Your face is gaunt from hunger and exhaustion. Your boots squelch with each step, still waterlogged from the last river crossing. You walk with a limp that wasn't there when you left. But you're here. You made it. The same steward who sent you out receives you in his chambers. The room looks exactly as it did 12 days ago. The same candles, the same parchment smell, the same narrow window letting in thin light. But you are not the same person who stood here before. The steward breaks the seal on the response letter. He reads it quickly, his eyes scanning the words with practiced efficiency. Whatever he finds there, his expression doesn't change. He nods once. That's it. That's the sum total of acknowledgement you receive. Your mission was successful. The message was delivered. The response was received. Whatever political manoeuvring was behind it all, whatever alliances were being forged or broken, has advanced one step further. The steward gives you a coin for your trouble. A single coin for 12 days of terror and suffering. It clinks into your palm, cold and small. He tells you to rest. There will be another message tomorrow, or the day after, or the day after that. There's always another message. The roads are always waiting. You find your way to the servants' quarters, moving through the familiar corridors like a ghost. Everything looks the same as it did before you left. The same straw pallets, the same rough blankets, the same snoring bodies of servants who spent the last 12 days safe within these walls. You collapse on your pallet and lie there staring at the ceiling. Every part of you hurts. You're dirty and hungry and so tired you can barely keep your eyes open. But you're alive. You made it. As you drift toward unconsciousness, you think about all the couriers who didn't make it, the ones who fell to bandits or weather or disease, the ones who got lost in unfamiliar territory and were never seen again, the ones who delivered their messages but never returned home. Every journey is a gamble. Every mission is a roll of dice with death waiting for the unlucky numbers. You won this time. Next time, who knows? Tomorrow, if you're lucky, you'll have a day of rest. You'll wash your clothes. You'll tend to your wounds. You'll eat food that doesn't have to be choked down while walking. Then another assignment will come. Another letter sealed with wax. Another destination to reach. That's the life you've chosen. Or perhaps the life that chose you. Either way, it's yours now for as long as it lasts. The legacy of medieval couriers extends far beyond their own time. The routes they travelled, worn into the landscape by countless journeys, became the foundations for later road systems. The paths they chose, selected for efficiency and safety over generations of experience, guided the construction of proper highways centuries later. Every modern road follows to some degree the trails that messengers beat into the earth. The techniques they developed, the skills they mastered, the networks they created, all of these laid the groundwork for the postal systems that would eventually connect the modern world. The Thurn and Taxis family, starting in the late 15th century, built a courier network across the Holy Roman Empire that would become the model for national postal services throughout Europe. Their post roads, with stations spaced a day's journey apart, echoed the ancient Roman cursus publicus and the Mongol yam system. Permanent infrastructure replaced improvised routes. Scheduled service replaced irregular delivery. What had been the desperate scramble of individual messengers became an organised system that anyone could use. But all of that was built on what came before. Every postal route follows paths that were first walked by messengers like you. Every relay station occupies ground that was chosen because earlier travellers found it convenient. The postal systems that deliver billions of letters every year are the direct descendants of the dirty, dangerous, often deadly work that medieval couriers performed. The documents that survive from the medieval period, the letters and treaties and records that historians use to understand the past, survived because someone carried them. A parchment, written in a London monastery, might end up in an archive in Rome because a courier rode through rain and bandits and plague to deliver it. A peace treaty signed by warring kings might survive to the present day because someone thought that piece of paper was worth dying for. Every historical document that exists was, at some point, in the hands of someone whose job was to carry it from one place to another. Without those carriers, without those couriers and messengers and envoys, the documentary record of the medieval world would be fragmentary at best. History itself depends on the work of men who are largely forgotten by it. You won't be remembered as an individual. History doesn't record the names of most medieval couriers, just as it doesn't record the names of most medieval people. You're part of a vast, anonymous mass that worked and suffered and died to keep the world running. The great lords whose letters you carry will have their deeds recorded in chronicles. Their names will be remembered for centuries. Their descendants will point to their portraits and tell stories of their accomplishments. You'll be lucky if anyone remembers you existed at all. But in a sense, that anonymity is its own kind of legacy. The postal worker who delivers your mail today is part of the same tradition. The courier who drops a package at your door, the truck driver moving cargo across the country, the pilot carrying mail across oceans, they're all inheritors of something that started with people like you. People who understood that information needs to move. People who dedicated their lives to making that movement possible. People who faced danger and hardship so that words could travel from one place to another. For now, though, you're just one man on one road, carrying one letter. The weight of it pressed against your skin where it's tucked in your boot. The wax seal cracked but intact. The message inside, whatever it says, reaching its destination because you refuse to give up. That's what it means to be a medieval courier. Not glory, not recognition, not the admiration of crowds or the gratitude of lords. Just the simple, stubborn determination to complete the journey you started, no matter what obstacles stand in your way. Just the grim satisfaction of arriving when arrival seemed impossible. just the knowledge that you did your job, delivered your message, played your small part in the vast machinery of medieval communication. Outside, the wind is picking up, and there's the smell of rain on the air. Tomorrow you'll be back on the road, facing whatever new challenges the world decides to throw at you. But tonight, just for a moment, you're safe, you're warm, you're alive. That's victory enough for one day. And so, dear listener, that was the brutal reality of being a medieval courier. A life of constant danger and endless travel, of secrets carried through hostile territory and messages delivered at the cost of blood and suffering, of mud and rain and bandits and disease, of sleeping in barns and eating mouldy bread and watching the horizon for threats that could come from any direction. These were men who held the threads of communication that held the medieval world together. Without them, lords couldn't coordinate, armies couldn't march, treaties couldn't be signed. The political, military and economic life of an entire civilization depended on their willingness to risk everything for a sealed piece of parchment, and history has largely forgotten their sacrifice. The chronicles remember the lords who sent the letters, they remember the battles that the letters coordinated, they remember the alliances that the letters forged. But the men who carried those letters through danger and darkness are rarely mentioned. They were expendable. That was the word the steward used all those pages ago. Expendable. And in a sense, he was right. Any individual courier could be replaced. The system could continue without any particular messenger. But the system couldn't continue without messengers in general. Someone had to carry the words, someone had to face the roads, someone had to risk the bandits and the storms and the illness. Those someones deserve to be remembered. The next time you receive a letter or a package, think about the journey that piece of paper would have taken 500 years ago. Think about the roads that had to be travelled, the rivers that had to be crossed, the bandits that had to be avoided. Think about the courier who would have carried it, cold and hungry and alone, pushing forward mile after mile because the message had to get through, sleeping in whatever shelter he could find, eating whatever food he could afford, watching the sky for storms and the tree line for threats. They were the unsung heroes of their age. They deserve to be remembered. If you enjoyed tonight's journey through history, take a moment to like and subscribe. It helps the channel grow and lets me know that these deep dives into forgotten corners of the past are something you want more of. Now let the gentle hum of your fan or the softness of your pillow carry you away. Close your eyes and let the images of muddy roads and dark forests fade into dreams. The medieval courier's journey is over for tonight. Yours towards sleep is just beginning. Rest well. I'll see you in the next one.